So whenever somebody asks what it's like to ride a motorcycle, it's kind of hard to describe, you know? I mean, really, it's just something you have to experience for yourself. But when you take a look at his photos, Michael Lichter comes about as close as you can to capturing the freedom and joy you feel while riding without, actually riding. From his first time pulling into Sturgis in 1979 with a camera strapped to his Harley-Davidson Shovelhead, Michael's traveled all over the world, documenting rallies, races, meetups, adventures, as well as people behind the handlebars, including some of the most world-renowned custom bike builders ever, and the most beautiful bikes. As he snapped away over the years, the motorcycle world took notice. First in Easy Riders magazine for a few decades, and most recently on DennisKirk.com's blog with his Lichter Notes. While he was at it, Michael curated an exhibition in 2000 called Motorcycles as Art at the Journey Museum in Rapid City, South Dakota, which then grew into a themed annual event at Sturgis, and then it became a permanent fixture at the Sturgis Buffalo Chip in 2009, showcasing Michael's work and some amazing custom bikes to millions of people who love motorcycles as much as he does. This is Michael Lichter. I'm your host, Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. All right, Michael Lichter, you are on Driven to Ride. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's good to be here.
Yeah, a photographic legend of the motorcycle industry. It's great to have you here. Let's start from the beginning. What do most people know you for? I know I kind of spoiled it, but what's your claim to fame?
I don't like to say that I have a claim to fame, but I'm known for my motorcycle photography. I'll just leave it at that in a very small, strange world.
Okay. Well, let's start from the very beginning then. How did you get even into motorcycling in the first place?
Like most people, I had the opportunity to get on bikes as a child, but unlike many people that I know in the motorcycle world, I did not have a motorcycle. So there were opportunities to get on friends' bikes or mini bikes whenever there was a chance, whether it was a Trail 70 or something like that going through the woods, or a mini bike at the schoolyard. You jump on whenever you could. So it really wasn't until I was a lot older that, I was, it was 76. So I was 21 years old when a friend loaned me his knucklehead. Mm-hmm. And it was a 1947 knucklehead with a very long Springer front end on it, a big long chopper. And it was very light, and the very powerful considering how light it was. It was still, of course, a 74-inch, but plenty of power for that. And I just fell in love with it instantly. And looking back, it's kind of funny because I realized that I'd read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance like 2 months before. Of course, I saw Easy Rider when it came out as a kid. A friend's mother snuck us in, and that was all good. But it wasn't until I got on that knucklehead that things really clicked. And a month later, I had a Honda 450. So that's really the roots of my riding.
Okay. So really, when you threw a leg over that knucklehead, were you hooked from the start?
Absolutely. I just smile ear to ear. And then 1 year later, I had my own Harley. I went out through a friend. Actually, his brother hooked me up, and I got a 1971 Shovelhead. Mm-hmm. Used in 1977. I got that from Frisco Choppers in San Francisco over the Halloween weekend.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then rode it back to Colorado.
Wow. So you jumped in with 2 feet. You went right on a big ride only a couple years or a year or two after.
Oh yeah. And that Shovelhead, I got lots of miles on it. I took it back to California. I took it up to Canada, rode it back to New York. I kind of laugh now because it was 74 inches, but at 1200 cc. And I hear people apologizing about their 1200 Sportsters that, it's just a little bike. You really wouldn't want to go long distances on it. I just don't get it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the displacement. I think it's more the willpower that you can take a smaller bike or a quote unquote smaller bike anywhere.
Exactly.
So I guess a couple of years after that, you took another big trip that probably changed the trajectory of your whole life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I did ride that bike to lots of places, and I started photographing, from the saddle or wherever the bike took me. So it would be photographing the bike or photographing places I went, photographing scenery on the way back from that first trip back from California. And then in 78, I tried to go to Sturgis. We were rebuilding the bike a little bit, and it wasn't ready in time. So I went a week late, and it wasn't a bike in town. I really went, seriously, is this really the mecca of motorcycling? And I was headed north, and I just kept going up to Canada and ended up in New York. A year later, in 79, I did go to Sturgis, and I photographed that for myself. I was exhibiting my work at the time. I also started working for some magazines. I was more coming from the art side of photography. And then some friends saw my work and said, hey, could we use that for a story they're writing? And did that a few times. And through Sturgis, which actually, no, it was in 79, I met some people and they said, why don't I send some photos in to Easy Riders? And I did. I sent 10 black and white prints in. They printed some. And the funny thing is I only sent those. I never sent any more. And they printed several of them, including a image that I'm quite known for. It's an image of a prosthetic leg leaning against the back tire of a panhead chopper. And a guy's asleep next to it in a moving blanket. And so people have connected me with that photo. And that was in that first group that was published. And then I don't know if I ran into people or they called or whatever and said, whatever happened, how come I didn't send more pictures? And I said, well, clearly you didn't care for them if you only printed 3 out of 10. And they said, no, that's not how it works. It's like most people don't get any printed, and please send more. And then within the 12 months following that, I did start doing assignments for them, going to events and shooting for Easy Riders, which led to a 40-year plus career shooting for them.
Wow. That's impressive. And all just because you went to Sturgis.
Yeah. I never planned to be a commercial photographer. Funny thing though is that this was already a couple years later. I'd done a lot of stories. I didn't get the Sturgis assignment until 81. That's when I went on assignment for them to Sturgis. And I think 82 started my Daytona. I've done more than 40 years of Sturgis and about the same of Daytona since then. But by 82, they were asking me to shoot bikes, and they said, too bad I don't have a studio. And we worked out a deal. They said, if I had a studio, that they would take a certain number of bikes a year. And I did the math, and it paid for me to build a studio in the backyard. It was paid off in 2 years.
Not bad.
And then it was there. And then other people said, oh, you have a studio. Can you do this photography for us? And my general answer to everything is just say yes. Actually, that first assignment in the studio was to shoot flowers, funny enough.
Oh, no way.
And everything went well. I shot that, and pretty much I would get one assignment after the other. And eventually it led to a career of shooting annual reports, advertising, you name it. I did a lot of travel for that. I had clients like in the 80s, my biggest client was Kraft Foods. That morphed into shooting for a lot of other commercial clients. It would change who the biggest client at any given time was. In 2008, after basically the economic crash, and I just didn't pursue it as much. There's so many people fighting for that little piece of the pie. My biggest client at that time, which continued to about 2011, was Oracle Computers. And I had a huge digital system, large format. I mean, they had certain requirements. I used to go to Europe and I'd see photos of mine of a computer that would be 4 stories tall on the side of a building.
Wow.
Yeah. But then I let that go. And I let it, when I say I let it go, I shot for a few more years, but then the art director I worked for left, gave me the names of all the people to contact, and I just never did. At that point, I kind of went back to the motorcycling that I'd been doing since the beginning, and I continued to focus on that.
In the creative space, you've got your passion, I imagine, but you got to do other stuff that pays the bills too. So you kind of have to branch out and do a little bit of everything.
Well, it was a great career. There were times when I had, it was me plus 2.5 other people, 2 full-time and a half-time person in the studio. And, that was my main assistant. Well, I've had assistants since 1987 full-time, but one assistant, Steve Temple, was with me for 11 years, which is very unusual in the photo world. And, but it was a real job with, a salary in medical and whatnot. That's how I treated it. And we ran it and it ran well. And I did that as well as the motorcycling on the weekends and all the big events. So it all worked. Took care of my family and kids in college. And now I'm back to biking on its own.
Yeah, can't ask much more than that. So, well, before we dive too much into the motorcycle thing, I want to ask you, how did you get into photography?
That goes back to when I was a kid. In a similar kind of way, the way I said I jumped on a mini bike or friend's Trail 70. When I was 5 years old, I remember an uncle took me into the darkroom to show me what it was like to process film. And we took a family picture and we went in the darkroom and processed the film and made a print. And of course, to kids then and even now, to get in a darkroom and see a print come up in the chemistry was like magic. It was amazing.
It is.
And now I continued taking pictures, of course, without a darkroom. But when I was 13, my dad loaned me a real camera, a camera that it was called a Pentacon. It was a Pentax mount, so you could actually have screw-on Pentax lenses. He got that during World War II, came back with it. And he loaned that to me when I was 13. And within a year of that, I had a darkroom in the basement, in the family laundry room, and was working till all hours of the night, printing my own, make my own prints and develop my film. I just loved it. I did that all through my teenage years. And my parents would come pounding on the door at 4 a.m, say, "It's a school night. Why aren't you in bed?" And I said, "Don't open the door. You're going to wreck everything. I'll go to bed soon." That's what it was like.
Nice. So let's go back to the motorcycles. Obviously it's been a huge part of a 40-year career. What is it about biker culture, custom bikes, just motorcycles in general? What kind of grabbed your attention and didn't let go about motorcycles?
I see it as twofold. There's the culture and then there's the bikes. I'd say it was the culture that first drew me in because I loved, I'd hitchhiked basically around the world. I spent 2 months in India and Nepal in the 70s and across Afghanistan, Iran. I hitchhiked across North Africa.
Wow.
And I love taking pictures of people and culture. And I just loved culture. I loved being immersed in it. And at the time in the 70s, I was photographing bikers after I got my motorcycle and also rodeo cowboys. I loved going to rodeos and stock shows and doing that. And then I was more in tune with the bikes. I hadn't had a bike and I didn't have a horse, and that was the focus. But I loved the culture and I loved being in places where people were so much themselves. They just were in the moment, living in the moment, having a great time. And that's what I like to photograph. Then when it came to the bikes, which was once Easy Rider said, can I do bike features for them? And again, my answer is always yes. And I built a studio and started doing bike features. I've done, my guess is about 1,200 bike features in the studio.
Wow.
I've probably done well over 1,500 features for Easy Riders and their sister publications over the years. But with the bikes, I saw that more as folk art. And my job in that was to do a good job photographing and representing what these look like and make them look good, but to get across the art of the motorcycle in a sense. So I consider my personal art more my photography when I go out and shoot out in the world. And when I shoot the bikes, I consider it different, more of a technical thing that I'm trying to capture these bikes the best I can and capture somebody else's art. And I remember in the 70s having it out with some artists where, I defended custom bikes as art. This is way before the Guggenheim show. And what I felt it was like one of the purest forms of folk art.
Sure.
People do needlework or beading and things like that, all these kind of folk arts. Custom bikes take a crazy amount of hours. Not that beading and needlepoint don't, but it also requires a crazy amount of money. And all you're going to get in the end is bragging rights. That's what they were going for. They go down to the bar, ride their bike after they finished it, and everybody is loving it, and that feels good. And that's what you get, that's your reward.
Yeah.
So I did feel it was a very pure form of folk art, and that's what I've documented for over 40 years and on the bike side of things. So
to the people then part of things, you mentioned that you really just get to see in culture, you get to see people really being themselves. I imagine that's probably what you saw at Sturgis that for very first time.
Yeah. Well, especially back then in the film days, let's say in the 70s and 80s, especially, well, right through the 90s. But when I started, there weren't many cameras out there. Somebody would have a Instamatic maybe, or point and shoots were just starting to come around in the 70s. So you're starting to see that, but film wasn't cheap, and so people didn't shoot a lot. So even though it wasn't that common to have a Nikon camera, let's say, it didn't faze people. It didn't bother people. They didn't really pose for you. They just went about their business, which is kind of strange. You think that if you stood out that much with a camera like that, why wouldn't it be really noticed, and why wouldn't it change the situation? But it didn't seem to. That part of that could be the way I put myself into those situations, for one. But you compare that to now, where everybody has a camera. Everybody has a camera in their pocket. Everybody's doing selfies. Everybody's shooting everything. The world is so crazily documented every moment that nothing's special anymore. You know what I mean? So, and yet when people are so camera conscious because of the camera in their pocket, you lift a camera and people start posing. So it's almost a challenge to go back to get people to feel natural and not be so aware of you. Again, it's like opposite what you'd think. Everybody has a camera. You think it wouldn't faze anybody, but it does. You pick up a camera and everybody is conscious of how they look. Where is it going? How is it going to be used? Things like that. Back then, people just didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've seen that big change at Sturgis over the years?
You've seen that change in our culture over the years. And one interesting point about all this is that I say that I have this interest in culture, and because I was writing, it was natural for me to go for that and document what I saw. But I do see subcultures, and in this case, whether it was rodeo cowboys for a while or bikers, that subcultures represent the whole.
Mm-hmm.
They represent our entire culture. They represent our country and its history. So, I've been documenting mostly Harleys, but, Harley-Davidson and biker culture now since the 70s. And in so many respects and regards, it's the history of our country.
Sure.
Those photographs from the 70s, I have photos that it says like Iran, and that was a photograph from 1980. Okay. And you could look at that and say that it places things, so you see that T-shirt. So you look at a shot like that, and there's very few T-shirts that are worn, or certainly that have logos on them or branded. There may be somebody with the farm implement supply place they work at and have a T-shirt, or there's just very few. And Harley wasn't protecting their trademarks. Anybody could have printed Harley-Davidson. And here somebody makes that shirt.
Really?
And yeah, until 82, no rules, and before they started enforcing it. Mm-hmm. So again, back to this T-shirt, it was the middle of the Iran hostage crisis. It was August 1980. And it wasn't until we had the election in November, mm-hmm. where Reagan came in, replaced Carter. And then on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 1981, would have been when the hostages were released. So you look at a photo like that and it says, it sort of represents history. What was going on? This is how people felt. They were like really pissed off, and they showed it in what they wore, what they talked about, you see?
Yeah. So
or photos from the 70s where I have one where it says, cigarettes, 60 cents or something like that. Well, you're not going to see a pack of cigarettes for 60 seconds now. So things like signage, whether it's in a washboard or a billboard, mm-hmm. that suggests time and history and place and what kind of cars are in the background. What did the buildings look like? It all tells the history. And it came up for me back in 2009 on my first trip to Cuba, where I really felt that I was photographing the Harleystas of Cuba, and I was going, wow, the history of these bikers is the history of Cuba, right from when the communists took over and nothing was allowed in. And that's why you won't see anything newer than a panhead there.
Wow.
right? It's just frozen in time.
Yeah.
So the plight of those people, that's the story of their country. So I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And it really makes you appreciate, photography from that standpoint where you are kind of, it's easy to brush off as just a snapshot of history, but the more you look at the photos from different eras, I think the more that's apparent and more important it really is. So,
yeah.
You mentioned going to Cuba. You mentioned hitchhiking kind of basically all across the world. Where's the furthest that your photography or motorcycling career has, or both has taken you?
I can tell you where I haven't been. I haven't been to South America, which is really strange.
Really?
You'd think that
Yeah.
from Colorado, I would have headed south.
Yeah.
But pretty much covered the rest of the world, Australia, New Zealand, China, Tibet, Russia. I've been to Japan 8, 9 times. I'm going again in December for Moon Eyes. I go every year.
Wow.
I go to some years. I've been to Italy 3 times. I had some collectors of my photography there, so I've had exhibitions there. Been invited to a lot of shows. So in January, I go to the Verona show. I'm a guest of the promoters there. When COVID hit in 2020, I came back on March 6th from photographing. In the middle of winter, I was in Siberia photographing ice racing.
Wow. Okay.
And that's where I came back from just as things were shutting down with COVID.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be a whole nother level of ice racing up there.
It was the Russian approach on steroids. I mean, they had hovercraft. There was a Bentley on tracks, a tracked Bentley. And every sort of motorcycle imaginable. We had a blast. It was so much fun.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. Well, and I guess I don't need to ask like what the most remote place you've been to, because it's probably hard to beat Siberia.
Yeah, that was pretty remote. I've been motorcycling in Nepal twice. That was a lot of fun, doing the Annapurna trek.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was on Royal Enfields. I did that in 2018 and again in 2019. It was kind of fun because it's the same area that I trekked in 1975. So like there was an area of Nepal where I spent about a month on foot going up and down mountains, and it took a month to go through this trail. And we did it on a motorcycle in a couple of days. There weren't roads, and now there are.
Is there a common thread you see in motorcyclists that kind of runs through the gamut of your experiences?
You would think the answer would be yes, but I'm not so sure. And I say that only because there's a big distinction between motorcycling as transportation and motorcycling for fun. And it seems like a natural historical progression. And I think it was probably can be seen the most obvious in England. I think the story of the cafe racers in particular. Now, I curated exhibitions of art and motorcycles for 22 years, mostly in one place in Sturgis, where a gallery, they built a 6,000 square foot gallery for me. And I had a themed exhibition every year that changed drastically. It was like starting a new business once a year, come up with a new idea, theme, had a new logo, invited new people. And it was really like starting from scratch every year.
Yeah.
I gave that up a year and a half ago. But anyway, I mentioned that only because one of those exhibitions was devoted to cafe racers. It was called Ton Up. And doing the ton refers to going 100 miles an hour on a bike, which, of course, on an interstate in America is nothing. But when you're on a 2-lane road and there's rock walls on both sides, and then a roundabout up ahead, going 100 miles an hour is pretty fast. So I bring this up again with the cafe race because that was the culture of in England, where motorcycles were so popular and everybody rode because you couldn't afford a car, right? I mean, the people rode motorcycles to get around. That was their transportation. The car was not even a possibility, at least for many years. And then there was the artfulness where people started making cafe racers, and there was the racing side of it. So certainly there were other sides. But you compare that to years later, once I think it was the Mini that really changed things, with the introduction of the Mini in the late 50s, and then basically the killing off of the British motorcycle industry. They had so many different brands and marks there because they no longer needed it. it no longer was transportation, and it got back to just being fun. You say, do it for speed, do it for fun, do it for the art of it. I see that distinction everywhere in the world. And in most of the world, it's still transportation, where you get a whole family and a goat on one motorcycle. And that motorcycle may only be 125 cc's.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it's hard to say that, what does that have in common with a guy that buys a new Harley and takes it out on the weekends or once a year for a big event?
Right. Yeah, there's a stark difference there for sure.
There's a stark difference there. So, but if I separate that into two groups, I would say yes. There's a similarity between everybody that rides a bike for transportation and everybody that, for transportation and utility, I should say, and everybody that rides a bike for pastime and just fun. So there's similarities within those groups.
Yeah. And I bet you a lot of people don't think about it that way, that, it might be fun to ride on the weekends or when it's a nice day out, but it makes you appreciate the fact that you can do that so much more, I think, when you realize that there are people in the world who only have a motorcycle as their entire family's transportation. Yeah, you don't think about that. I sure didn't.
In a way, it's almost too bad that it's not needed, because I think that's hurt motorcycling. They talk about all this, trying to get younger people into motorcycling and get them on the little push bikes and things like that. Well, I think that would be another way to do it. Have utility vehicles that actually get used and promote motorcycling as well.
Yeah, really bring back the utility of it. And you talked about your motorcycles as art exhibit. And a couple of years ago, you actually had one that focused on younger folks, dare I say millennials. Can you tell me about maybe that particular one and how, maybe you saw the future of motorcycling a little bit through these custom makers, and just tell me about the motorcycles at art exhibit just in general.
It started back I actually had a small exhibit at a place called the Apex Gallery. It's the School of Mines in Rapid City in 2000. And in 2001, I connected with the Journey Museum, a beautiful museum in Rapid City, and basically signed on for a 5-year deal that I'd produce these shows for 5 years. And that got moved to Sturgis and eventually led to the Buffalo Chip building this 6,500 square foot gallery for me. With 80 theater lights and a few hundred feet of running wall space with spotlights on it for the art. And then I had these exhibitions where I come up with a theme just for the bikes and the art. Now, for that particular exhibit you mentioned, it was called Young Bloods. And I forget the subhead, which is quite important to have that name, but that one was called Young Bloods. And to be in it, you had to basically be a millennial. I had a cutoff, a start and an end time, and I forget the exact year that ended. But basically at the time, they were up to about 34 years old.
Okay.
And I think there was a guy in there that was 20. And it was multifaceted, because I'd say at least since 2010, 2011, I became very conscious of the demographics of Sturgis and all events and motorcycle in general aging, as I was too. I'm not going to deny that. So I sort of took it upon myself to say, we need, if this is going to stay alive, we need to bring younger people in. And so I did start doing exhibitions. I did one with some Born Free builders in 2013, I think it was, 2014. Mm-hmm. And constantly always tried to bring younger people, bring women into it, and try to promote that. So that show in particular that you're referring to, I think it was 2017 or 18, the Millennial Show, as it's fondly been called, but Young Bloods. What I felt was that it was that age group that brought the energy and vitality to what we do. That they're the ones coming up with new ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of looking at things and new ways of building. And they're open to all this stuff. And so that's why I focused on them, to see what they're doing. Like with my exhibition in general, I would find a subject that I liked and try to hone in on it and say what's important about it and what makes this interesting, what makes it relevant, and go from there. And that's how that Millennial Show came about. The art on the walls was also from the same group of people, and because we tend to, you show the same old artist, it starts looking old and stale. What's really going on? What are younger people doing? So that's why I think that was cool.
Yeah. Did it give you some hope for the industry and for the future of motorcycling, that there are still some folks out there that are, doing their own thing, or that they're being themselves, or maybe even doing some wild stuff?
there's no question on my part. I have a lot of hope for motorcycling and the motorcycle industry that people come up to me, or I get emails all the time about my old photography, and people saying, "Oh, I wish I was around when you were first doing this." Or, "Oh, you must, those stories are incredible. And, you must miss those old times." Right. And really what I say, my response to all that is that what's going on now is the best it's ever been in my 45-year career.
Really?
Yeah, I think these are the most, people say, "Oh, it was so cool. They were so outrageous, the things they did in the 70s. I would say as a whole, our society has become extremely conservative, and much more conservative than I enjoy. But there's still, I think, hope in the sense that I look at what's going on with motorcycling, and particularly with younger people and the bikes they're building, the events that they put on, the stuff that they like to do. And I go, this is awesome. This is relevant. This is fun. This is energetic. It's where I want to be, what I want to be associated with, and what I want to promote.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I mean, it's, being a younger-ish person, I do see that there are a fair amount of people, my age and younger who are into motorcycles and that like to meet up and have events. And, it makes me excited for the future. So talking about, over the decades, I guess, and let's talk about you a little bit in particular. What is your favorite trip that you've ever taken on a motorcycle? I know there's only a couple to choose from.
Yeah, I always say that asking about favorites, talking about favorites, so it's kind of like about your kids. You don't want to point to one kid and say, "Oh, you have a favorite," right? That you like different things about different people, and different things about different events, and different things about different places. So I don't know that I could think of a place that I wouldn't want to go back to.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's funny. People say to me, "Oh my God, you've gone to Sturgis for 42 years." I have over a year. I think it's like a year and a quarter of my life has been spent in Sturgis.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of time to spend there. But people say, "Well, how can you go back?" And I go, I'll go to the same road, but it will look different every time. The weather's different. I'm there at a different time of day. I'm looking a different way. I have a different lens on. There's different people going by. It's changed.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know people that have been to Sturgis twice and they have no intention to go back. They say they've seen it. And I go, wow. I've gone 43 times. I've spent a year and a quarter there, and I'm still seeing stuff I've never seen before, and I love it.
Yeah.
Right? So, certainly there's trips. I've done 5 cannonballs coast to coast now, but those I'm sitting on the back of a bike, and I sit backwards for every mile. So I have with the 5 cannonballs, and then riding around Europe, Japan, and all sorts of other places, I have over 25,000 miles backwards. So, it's a little different way of riding, but I love that also. So, the cannonballs have all been great, just every mile on 2-lane roads, and just with all the cool people and cool bikes. I love those. Riding through Nepal was fantastic. I mean, a lot of the events I do, I'm not riding. So when I go to Japan, I've only been ridden on a bike once in Japan, where I was in control and riding, because, it's the middle of winter also. And after Moon Eyes, I spend a week going to shops. We run around. I have all my gear and lights, and days are early because it's wintertime. So I have lights set up and visit 2 shops a day. Those are fantastic. I mean, gone to Siberia. Cuba was fantastic. That was really great as a cultural and motorcycling experience. But I can't really say there's a favorite. I just love it all. I mean, it's all so much fun, and there's so much to see and so much to learn. Every day you're learning, which is, to me, what life's all about.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if you have so many that you can't pick a favorite, or it's hard to decide, I think that's not a bad spot to be in,
Well, hopefully there'll be many more. If I'm invited places, or I just pick places I want to go. The events are so many great events right now. It's just another level. Everything's at another level.
Well, speaking of kind of another level, you mentioned about riding a motorcycle backwards and have done 25,000 miles on it. How did you even discover that technique? I mean, I don't think, is that a common photography technique for being on a motorcycle, or is that a Michael Lichter original?
The first time I did it, I don't know that I ever saw anybody do it before. Now, I know they photographed the Tour de France They have special BMWs with these rotating back seats and sort of
oh, cool,
like a running board that's in a big U, so they can move their feet around. And mine is much more stealth. I just jump on a bike and sit backwards, But I did have for the first Cannonball, Carl Olson, him and his son Matt, they took a 53 Panhead and they actually made a little seat for the back. It didn't rotate or anything, but they had footrest for me, and it's like super comfortable.
Yeah.
So I did the Cannonball on a 53 Panhead. The other 4 times I did it was just on the back of a stock bike, sitting backwards on the back seat. All I need is a sissy bar so I don't fall off. And it could be just a 4-inch sissy bar. It doesn't need to be a big one, just to feel that safety there. So that, like I said, they did it in the Tour de France. And I've seen other people do it. There was one back in the Discovery Channel years in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'd hook up and shoot some of those events. And I remember I was doing Billy Lane against Dave Perowitz, which was riding we were in Pensacola, Florida, and went to Dallas. And that was, one of my backwards deals. Actually, they had the bike. So they had a camera guy on the back of a bike. And they said, I'll be able to get on now and again, right? But I could be in the back of this truck. And I didn't have anybody riding me specifically that time. I don't think. But we went like 5 miles down the road, pulled into a rest area, mm-hmm. and their camera guy got off and said that if I wanted to get on the back of the bike, it's mine the rest of the trip. They were going to shoot from the back of the truck, that there's no way they could ride backwards. They're going to get sick. And I just never thought about it. I jumped on and did it. But original or not, basically photographers will do anything for the shot, right? You're always looking for another angle. I had a little cartoon somebody gave me hanging up in the studio, and it was a little cartoon figure of a photographer. Mm-hmm. And they're on top of a mountain. It looked like on the top of Mount Everest, and there's mountain ranges all around, peaks. Mm-hmm. And the little bubble said, if only I had a step ladder. So, like you're always looking for that little different angle. So
yeah. Well, I have to imagine your field of view is way better backwards from the back of them, because you do almost have 180 degrees rather than having somebody in front of you that, is kind of blocking half of your shot.
Oh yeah. No, it's a true 180. It's a great view. It's a great way to travel. I love it. And, I may miss out on some of the looking forward shots. I probably should get more of that. Sometimes I'm sideways and I turn a little beyond to get some of that. But again, I do have, like you said, a pretty wide angle of view, and it gives me a lot of options and control that I don't have. Now, I'll also shoot from the saddle. I mean, I used to have the camera, I'd set it like that, but it's tough because your right hand's on the throttle, and that's also the finger you use the shutter. So it's like, how do you make that work? It's kind of tough. So, you'd lock. This is, of course, pre-cruise control. You just have a little spring lock on the throttle so that it locked in. Not the safest thing in the world, but do that. But, you go with technology. So I actually have my first new bike ever. I have a brand new Harley-Davidson that I bought.
Oh, cool.
I have it really outfitted for photography.
Oh, wow.
So it's a Lowrider ST, which is a beautiful bike. Brad Richards did a great job designing that for Harley, and the saddlebags kind of match and they look great, but they're these little clamshells that I can't put anything in. So Paul Weidman from Bare Knuckles Choppers out of St. Louis, he made a bracket for me. And I have SW Motec adventure bags in place of the original. So it looks kind of goofy and whatnot. But, and then Harley set me up with a big overnight bag that goes on your sissy bar or whatever. And I have a backseat and a sissy bar. So actually it's set up now that when I get where I'm going, that comes off. My son and I typically travel together. So he could let his bike down and he could jump on mine. I could sit backwards and he could shoot me from my bike. Sitting backwards, going forwards. I have it set up where I have a little control at the throttle. I have a little cable release remote set up there. So I could hold the camera and do all that. So I feel pretty safe about it. You just go with the flow and technology and history and figure out where you fit in.
You do what you do to get the shot, like you said.
No, I always say I just put one foot in front of the other and see where it takes me.
Yeah, that's wild, man. And you've had a heck of a career so far. But are you working for anybody new, doing any new projects?
I'm the kind of person that I love checking email and I love answering the phone because I go, whoa, what's going to be on the other end. It could be an amazing opportunity. And so I look forward to that. And in that light, actually, about 2.5 years ago, the president of Dennis Kirk, a huge motorcycle parts distributor, actually even in the snowmobile world as well, winter sports, but huge in motorcycling, and they're just great people. I know this guy for a number of years, and he calls and says he wanted to do something with me, and he wasn't sure what. And over the course of a couple months, they kind of came up with the idea to have a blog, and they said, what if we do a Lichter notes section on the blog? And I do my features there. And they had no problem with taking features that I was doing for Easy Riders, and Easy Riders didn't have a problem with them going digital. So for me, it was a great opportunity. It was really worked out well, at least for about 1.5 years. And so we did it. So now they actually pay my expense to go to events. They're amazing people. They're such wonderful people to work for. And what's great about that is I don't mind pushing them and telling people buy your parts from them because they are great people. So that's really nice. And they let me do whatever I want. I just send in, my features there will have like 80 photos on them. Bikes will have more like 30, but events will be like 80 compared to 20 in a magazine. And Easy Riders used to have like 800 words. These will be 2,000 word features. And so it's really fun putting it all together, and it's been great. Other opportunities come. Promoters invite me. I've mentioned already Moon Eyes and Verona show. I get other promoters. Galveston, I'm involved with them. They invite me down. So depending on the show, if it sounds like it's fun and good, I won't say I accept every offer, and there's too many to accept them all. But there's some great things out there that I look forward to doing. So looking forward to doing plenty more.
Yeah. Obviously, you take amazing photos, but there are so many photos on your website. I spent probably an hour just looking through all the photos you have. So tell me how someone can check out all your photos.
That's my last name, Lichter, with the word photo. So lichterphoto.com. And there are many thousands of photos on there. And they're organized by pull-down menus from the top under bikes or events. And the events are sorted by event or by year. And basically, when you go to any gallery, whether it's a bike or an event, it'll default into what I call top picks. So you're not looking at hundreds or thousands of photos. So you get the sense of an event. And I always say that that's what I would offer to editors of a magazine. This is what I deem the best photos that you want to make your story out of. Then there's other views, featured or view all. So somebody wanting to see, I know Lichter took my photo. Where is it? You may have to go to view all and search in there. But it's all there. It's a big website. Yeah,
I think anybody could spend hours just appreciating all the different photos because, like you said, it's from different years and different events, and so there's so many different flavors and slices of life on there that you can just get lost in the best way possible. So.
I like that idea, getting lost in the photos. I'm at it 45 years, so that's a lot of stories and a lot of different things. So, yeah, it's been good. It's been a good ride that, with this new bike, I put 5,000 miles on in July and August, just going to some events and photographing them. And I feel like it's just a whole new chapter now that my bikes up until now have never been so reliable and been able to carry all my stuff. So it's like, wow, this is really cool, a whole new dimension. So yeah, why not keep going?
Cool. Well, Michael Lichter, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's been a great interview, and hope our paths cross again sometime.
Hopefully we'll meet up, Mark. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts, too. Do you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure? Email us, hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.